Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I would like to thank the organizers and everyone attend this panel. I am Ana Flávia Machado, speaking from Brazil, and I've organized and invited researchers from South America to talk about creative economy in four different countries: Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and Colombia. So, Lía Barrese is an economist specialized in culture and creative industries. She is originally from Argentina, and nowadays she is an assistant professor at the University of Barcelona and is working as an assistant research on behalf of the same university for the EJ 2020 European Research Project Cicerone. Andrea Báez Montenegro is an associate professor at the Institute of Statistics of the Faculty of Economic and Administrative Sciences of the Universidade Austral de Chile. She has a PhD in Applied Economics from the Universidade de Valladolid in Spain. Alice Demattos Guimarães is a cultural urban economist from Brazil. At present, she is a PhD candidate at Moon Center for Innovation and Regional Development, Western Norway University of Applied Science, within Crowd Project, crowdfunding in the culture sector. Laura Mussi is a political scientist. Nowadays, Laura works as a part of the general direction team at the Agency for Territorial Renewal. She is involved in the creation and development of communication strategies directed to communities in 170 municipalities in Colombia. So now I would like to invite Lía to present. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Hope you can see my screen and everything is looking great for everyone. Thank you very much, Anna, for the introduction and the invitation to this panel. It is a real pleasure to me to be part of this conference next to this amazing group of colleagues. My name is Lía Barrese, and I will present today a brief overview of the state of the creative economy in Argentina. Let me briefly introduce the outline of today's talk. First, I will start by presenting the CINCA, the Cultural Information System of Argentina, and the definition taken by this institution with respect to the sectors and the methodology applied to measure the impact of the culture in the economy of the country. Following that, I will show the cultural growth added value and the employment contribution of culture in an inter and intra-industry comparative perspective. Finally, I will touch upon the issues of the geographic cultural concentration, a very relevant aspect to consider in the country, and will make a brief comment on the impact of COVID on the CCIs. I will end by presenting some conclusions, which I hope we can keep on discussing later in the debate. So what are we talking about when we refer to the creative industries in Argentina? Well, first we need to start by introducing CINCA, the Cultural Information System of the country in charge of answering that. Since 2008, CINCA is a body depending on the Secretary of Culture and Creativity, a bureau from the Ministry of Culture that produces, systematizes, disseminates information related to the cultural activity of the country. It is both a management tool and a public information instrument. It works with inputs from different sources, such as its own service, the National Statistics Institutes, provincial governments, and business chambers, among others. It developed several projects that try to account for the various facets of the Argentinian cultural reality, such as the cultural map, the satellite account of culture, and the national survey of controlled consumption. Precisely, the satellite account of culture, from now on, I will refer to it as the culture account, is an economic information system whose frame of reference is the national account system, and is going to be the main source of information of today's presentation. The culture account measures, among other things, the added value of cultural industries, information about trade, employment, government spendings on culture, and the household consumption of cultural goods and services. The methodology used by the culture account is inserted in the UNESCO Cultural Statistic Framework and subscribes to the main international guidelines established in the Andrés Bello Agreement, an organism that standardized the economic measurement of the culture to which several countries in Latin America have subscribed. Precisely, the culture account takes the methodological guide for the implementation of the satellite account of culture in Latin America prepared by the Andrés Bello Agreement, which last update corresponds to the year 2015. Following the Andrés Bello framework, the CINCA understands cultural products as those whose reason for being consists of creating, expressing, interpreting, preserving, and transmitting symbolic content. The delimitations of the sectors and the activities that make up the cultural industries in the country is carried out in accordance with the Andrés Bello Agreement and the specifications of the system of the national accounts in Argentina. Once the products were identified, the activities that produced them were defined in order to measure their gross added value, employment, trade metrics. As you can see, in general, the sectors and activities selected are in line with what internationally, mostly UNESCO, has defined as creative economy. Nevertheless, there are three sectors marked on the slide with stars whose estimation has a special characteristics. These are design, cultural education, and digital content. Due to time constraints, I will not be able to expand on them now, but I will gladly answer if you have more questions about that in the debate. The cultural gross added value is one of the most relevant indicators produced by the culture account. This economic aggregate measures the proportion of final cultural goods and services included in the sectors and activities defined previously throughout the national territory. This publication presents the cultural GVA at constant prices of 2004. The need of considering the cultural GVA at constant prices intends to avoid the distortion generated by prices, as inflationary processes are constantly present in the country. Now, as we can see in the graph, culture is contracting its weight in the general economy. The cultural GVA fell 2.7% in 2019, and of course, much more in 2020, as we shall see. That means that, valuated at 2004 prices, culture went from generating 15.18 million pesos in 2018 to 14.77 million in 2019, deepening the downward trend that started the year before. However, all along the period here analyzed, the share of culture remained stable, representing 2.6% of the total economy. It is interesting to observe that during the same period, the variations in the cultural GVA and the GVA of the total economy follow a similar path, although those in the cultural sector show less pronounced fall on prices. Since 2017, the economy undergone a recessive process, and in 2018, negative growth rates are observed, both in the cultural and in the total economy. The year 2019 once again showed negative variations of the total economy and the cultural GVA, with the particularity that here the cultural production had a much more pronounced drop. Observing the contributions of culture in an inter-industry comparative perspective, we can see that in 2019, the share of culture in the economy was higher than that of the energy sector and hotels and restaurants. In addition, the contribution of culture to the total GVA is similar to that of the private health and financial intermediation, and represents more than 2/3 of what is generated by mining and construction. Now, observing the contributions of culture in an intra-industry perspective, we can see that there is a strong lead by the audiovisual sector, the most significant in volume of production, followed by advertising, publishing, and digital content. These four sectors accounted for 72% of the cultural production in both 2015 and 2019. Comparing these 2 years, we can observe that the audiovisual sector, one of the most traditional industries of the country, maintains its leadership, representing around 30% of the cultural GVA in both years. But the advertising sector, that ranked second in 2015 with 18%, decreased its participation to 14% in 2019. Similarly, the publishing sector went from representing 14% in 2015 to 12% in 2019. Clearly, these two segments lost ground compared to the digital content segment, which notably increased its share from 12% in 2015 to 17% in 2019. Now, regarding cultural employment, the other most relevant indicator produced by the Culture Account, it estimates the number of jobs in the private sector within the sectors and the cultural activities pointed before. In 2019, cultural jobs represented 1.5% of the total employment of the country, a share that has remained constant since 2015. The participation of cultural employment in the economy was higher than that of the energy and mining sectors, similar to that of the financial intermediation, and represents approximately 1/5 of that generated by the agricultural sector. The intrasectorial analysis shows that the audiovisual sector is, again, the one that contributes the most to the cultural employment, with 91,000 jobs. It is followed by the advertising and design sectors with approximately 51,000 posts each, and publishing with 37 jobs in total. Among the four, these sectors accounted for the 74% of the creative jobs in 2019. This composition is closely related to that of the cultural gross added value, in which the audiovisual, advertising, and publishing sectors are also among the ones that contribute the most to the cultural production. Nevertheless, we can see here that the digital content sector, the one that is rapidly growing in terms of added value, only accounts for 7% of the jobs, while the design segment is the one occupying its position in the podium of the four. Regarding the composition of the cultural employment, the jobs can be classified into three groups according to their occupational category. Registered wage earners, they are declared in the social security system and can be accounted through the national pension system. The unregistered jobs, they are not declared in the system and are generally estimated indirectly through, for example, household service, and the non-salaried jobs corresponding to the self-employment. Now, the composition of the employment in the cultural sector follows a similar distribution to that of the total private employment of the economy. Between 40 and 45% are registered jobs. Almost a quarter are unregistered jobs, and about a third are self-employed. When employment is analyzed by cultural activity, it's observed that 5 of the 10 branches that make up the cultural sector have a higher proportion of registered jobs than the cultural average. These 5 are cultural education, visual arts, audiovisual, music, and design, the first 5 that you can see here in the graph. On the other hand, regarding the unregistered label, the cultural sectors with the most precarious employment are precisely digital content and performing arts. Finally, self-employed people is significant in advertising, design, and publishing sectors. Referring to the compensation for salaried work, it is estimated that cultural work receive an average remuneration of 657,000 per year in 2019, higher than the average of the total private economy of 477,000 pesos that same year. These values are also higher than those of other sectors, such as retail, private health, and hotels and restaurants. On the other hand, sectors such as energy and financial intermediation far exceed the average remuneration of culture and those in the total private economy. Of all cultural activities, those in the cultural education and audiovisual are the ones that receive the best average annual remuneration, followed by those in the sectors of design and advertising. In contrast, performing arts and digital content, again, are the sectors with the lower pay. According to the last data available from CINCA, the sectors with the highest number of companies are the same top 3: audiovisual, advertising, and publishing. The level of cultural and creative concentration is quite high, with 38% of all accounted creative companies in the city of Buenos Aires, and 22% in the province of Buenos Aires, which mostly refers to the metropolitan area, accounting then for 60% of the cultural infrastructure concentrated in the same region. CINCA built an indicator to measure the concentration rate of each sector, showing that the strongest concentration can be found in the sectors of music, with 60% of their companies located in the city of Buenos Aires, advertising with 53% in the same city, and publishing with 51%, the ones shown down here. Cultural and creative industries were the third sector in the economy most affected by the pandemic in the first half of the 2020. This fall is reflected on the cultural participation in the total production of the economy, as cultural industries went from representing 2.6% of the total GVA in the first quarter of 2020, as showed before, to represent 2.1% in the second quarter. The 27% drop on the cultural gross added value is reflected unevenly in each sector, as we can see in the second graph. In this sense, the health measures adopted to mitigate the expansion of the virus clearly affected the suspension of live events. Sectors where the drop was higher than the average of the rest of the cultural industries. On the other hand, in sectors declared as essential services, where consumption is more inelastic to changes of income, such as TV and radio, the level of activity showed practically no changes. Now, to conclude, as we all might know, cultural and creative goods and services are highly dependent on economic cycles. Their consumption suffers rapidly in the face of a recession of the general economy. In Argentina, cultural and creative industries are mostly dependent on the domestic market and therefore purchasing power of the people and public policies. The period that we saw from 2015 to 2019 was characterized by being a period of recession and a significant decrease in the budget for culture, slowing the momentum of the sector not only economically, but also in its institutional support. The contraction of cultural activities comes hand by hand with the economic crisis and the fall in the productive activities that affects in a greater proportion the traditional industries of the cultural sector, such as audiovisual and publishing, sector characterized for having an industrial profile that demands fixed capital, investment, and qualified labor. Two differentiated dynamics are observed then within the cultural sector. On the one hand, the drop in the activity of these traditional cultural industries as a consequence, again, of the cuts of subsidies and drop in the consumption, also because of the difficult to accessing to financing, an increase in industrial cost and trade liberalization process, all aspects affecting as well the rest of the economy. On the other hand, the reverse process occurs in the digital content sector, with positive growth rates in the last years with an average of 50% annually. As a consequence, we can observe a process of worsening of the working conditions because, as I said before, the digital sectors are the ones with a higher number of non-registered jobs and lower paid. Finally, COVID being still present, the digitalization of cultural content opens up an opportunity. Consumption patterns are changing and online content distribution platforms allow a geographic reach unthinkable at another times. These elements allows us to think in the potential of the cultural sector to gain dynamism and become an engine for exports, but also for the generation of employment with high added value that potentially could be less geographically concentrated in Buenos Aires. But as illustrated, Argentina's economic instability and its volatile exchange rate policy will always pose an obstacle to the potential development of these and other industries in the country. And this must also be taken into account so as not to fall into the risk of romanticizing the economic potential of the CCIs. Nevertheless, cultural and creative industries are more than its economic contributions. In Argentina, they have served as well in its social and political function. Culture gives us the capacity to create meaning as much as creativity is this essential element for innovation. So creative destruction, innovation, affection, and memory. Cultural and creative industries are also all that, but we just haven't yet developed the statistic to prove it. Thank you very much. That was all.
Great, Lía. Thank you. Please, Andrea.
Hola, ¿puedo compartir yo mi pantalla? Sí, hola, somos poquitos y voy a hablar en español porque el inglés no lo domino, entonces la voz en off es de una colega, hay que ser creativos en estas circunstancias y por eso voy a compartir mi pantalla. ¿Dónde tengo esto para compartir? Un minuto. Se me perdió la pantalla.
Andrea, Alice can share your presentation. If you...
Ahí estamos. No encuentro aquí. Ahí está. ¿Lo ven ahí?
Hi, good morning to everybody.
Andrea, we can't listen to you. And not either the recording
No
voice.
te podemos escuchar, no te podemos escuchar.
The creative economy in Latin America, number 2. The inclusion of the creative economy at the regional level, and the last part, number 4, is general comments about effects of the pandemic, development, demand and supply, and measuring impact. Creative economy evolution in Chile. This figure shows the evolution of the creative economy in Chile, and it has been developing for more than 10 years. In 2017 was created the National Plan for the Promotion of Creative Economy involving public and private sector, the academy, and civil society. The goal was to empower the creative economy to capture the growing national and international demand, to strengthening the ecosystem for the commercialization of creative goods and services was made through dynamic entrepreneurship, innovation, valorization of the territory's heritage, generation, attraction, and retention of talent. Actions that emerge. Among them, the emerging actions were taken in order to improve the export competitiveness of the prioritized sectors: audiovisual, music, publishing, and design. A second action was to install and certify technical and business skills for export. To generate dynamic market intelligence leads to guide strategic decisions in terms of trade, content development, and technological investment. The second part shows comparative figures for Latin America. As you can see, in Brazil as the largest contribution from the creative sector, and in the last place, Chile with $3.98 billion distribution of creative workers. In the graphic B, this graph shows, for example, that Brazil has 0.8% of creative workers with respect to its population. Colombia reaches 2.3%, Argentina reaches 1.2%, and Chile does not reach 1%, which is very low. In figure number 2, we see in terms of exports, Brazil is the main exporter. Chile presents a constant growth, although the series only reaches to the year 2016. In figure number 3, we can see, on the other hand, that the contribution to GDP, Mexico has 4.8%, which is the highest contribution, followed by Argentina, and Chile has just 2.2%. In figure number 4, we can see that participation by creative sector, the 4 countries present a similar participation. The highest being design, followed by new media and craft. In Chile, the sector with the highest participation is design, 63.8%, followed by craft and new media, both with 11.4%. In this slide, we can see the map of Chile, which is divided into 16 territorial units called regions. The metropolitan region concentrates 40.5% of the country's population of 19 million approximately. This shows a centralization of both population and resources, both general and focused on the creative sector. It has a 6.6% share of employment. Here we display the result of the regional characterization in terms of variables associated with the creative economy in the dimensions of funding, cultural employment, formal economic activity, education, infrastructure, and cultural consumption. For example, we see variables such as cultural funds, creative sector, jobs, sales in dollars per capita, and cultural consumption. These variables were collected from various formal sources. On the other hand, in this slide, we can see the results of the hierarchical cluster analysis. The result was a 5 clusters. The first cluster consisted of 9 regions defined by level of development as low, medium, followed by 3 clusters involving 2 regions each, which were defined as low, medium, and medium height, and 1 cluster consisting of the metropolitan region classified as high development. The map shows the spatial distribution of this classification. On the other hand, in this slide, we see a series of maps that reflect the univariate effect on the results of the cluster analysis. We can appreciate the effect of centralization as well in funding, employment, and creative enterprise. In relation to creative sales and education, we have the same effect of the previous variables. In consumption, we observe a more homogeneous behavior between regions. General comments. In terms of impact, the most adverse situation has been in the activities alive. In order to solve, the Ministry of Culture and Patrimony has allocated $20 million to competitive fund proposals. A solution might be to plan a global strategy. In terms of impact, the most adverse situation has been in the activities alive. In order to solve, the ministry has allocated $20 million to competitive fund proposals. A solution might be to plan a global strategy. Some of the proposed solutions are tax legislation with incentives for the private sector, Some of the proposed solutions are tax legislation with incentives for the private sector, create a specific subsidy system, active intervention of the Ministry of Economy that can develop instruments to support chain production of the creative sector. Effort to boost the creative sector at the operating level, it has not been reflected in the increase in creative consumption at the national level, according to official figures. Might be due to the fact that not all consumption is being measured. Internet consumption, pandemic time of formal creative enterprises. It has been difficult to differentiate consumption to a level of national and international creative products. To measure impact, it's relevant to consider priorities. In order to do that, we suggest to create a methodology to measure impact generated by the creative economy, to elaborate synthetic indicators to measure cultural development with a higher level of disaggregation, to carry out the satellite account that it has been in planning since 2015. And finally, to evaluate a territorial platform specifically in the dimension of culture and ethnic diversity. That's all, and thank you very much for your attention.
Unas partes técnicas con desfase. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Thank you, Andrea. Please, Alice.
Yes. Can you all see the presentation? So yes, I have to start saying that it is indeed a great pleasure to be part of this panel. And of course, talking after these two very insightful presentations that we just heard. And of course, representing our South America, right? So, well, I'll be following the dialogue, tackling the cultural creative industries in Brazil. So this study here is part of our cultural economics research group of the Federal University of Minas Gerais, in which I have the luck to be a researcher with excellent scholars and of course, dear friends, which is our chair, Professor Flávia Machado, the scholar Rodrigo Cavalcanti Michel, and Gabriel Vaz de Melo. So let me give you now the outline for our presentation today. Firstly, we're going to place culture into the development process in the periphery countries. And then we will talk about the creative economy definitions and some of the Brazilian policies towards the sector. And after that, we will delve into the numbers and also highlighting some of the pandemic figures to then wrap up with some final considerations. I think we know that there is a dominant literature on the topic of cultural creative industries, which is mainly Anglo-Saxon and with a strong economic bias. But the fact is that somehow the creative cultural economy has been consolidated as a strategy to overcome the contemporary challenges. And multilateral agencies such as UNESCO already present this position, but also recognize that poverty and inequality will not be suppressed by this trend policy, and is actually can exacerbate some of the socioeconomic inequalities already existent. But UNESCO also recognized that Latin America has a legacy of a continental tradition of culture linked to social rights. And in this sense, we thought that was important to bring here this need to go beyond the public policies and academic debate of the so-called global north, and try to do a process of contextualizing knowledge in which the colonial movements talk about. And therefore we bring Celso Furtado, who deserves our attention. And he was, but he still is, very relevant figure in Brazil, and especially when debating the relationship between center and periphery, and treating development in its multifaceted dimension, in which economy, politics, sociology, and above all, culture were essential elements to understand. And he has a historical structural approach, the reasons why the peripheral countries are still remained on sidelines, especially due to this so-called technological dependence. So for Furtado, thinking about development would start actually from a visualization of substantial ends, and not from this logic of externally imposed means. The development process would encompass the rediscovery of a creative genius capable of revealing a horizon of indigenous solutions. So governments would be engaged in, of course, improving quality of life when highlighting the potential of the local and regional own culture. In this perspective, the cultural policies, and which is the main theme of this conference, would be placed as a reallocation and a deepening of the social ones. So this Furtadian focus was the reference for Brazilian cultural policies in several different periods throughout history, such as the one of the Creative Brazil Plan, which would involve several ministries in a joint action for sustainable socioeconomic development, anchored in the national creativity and culture. The plan was formulated in 2012, but it did not come to be concreted. But anyhow, we here in this study use the classification of cultural creative industries, considering the material and immaterial heritage, archives and museums, crafts, popular, indigenous, and Afro-Brazilian cultures, gastronomy, visual arts, dance, song, circus, theater, cinema, TV, animation and digital games, literature, design, architecture, and some digital arts. But of course, Brazil is suffering a lot and regarding the political scene, which sadly included the end of the Ministry of Culture in 2018. And again, yeah, we couldn't see this plan taking place. So despite this fact that the cultural policies in Brazil are being weakened, some agents that are part of the cultural creative segments, they are trying to elaborate some cultural policies discussion, trying to go beyond this north-north axis. So some scholars pointed that the economic mainstream ignores the result of miscegenation and cultural crossing of indigenous, mestizo, and African Brazilian people on the cultural expressions in the country. And this diversity is actually what is the condition that today presents as the resistance towards this cutting in our public scene. So the Aldir Blanc law, which was a law to grant emergency income to artists and cultural workers during the pandemic, show this resistance and also contributed to reorganize the sector, strengthening some networks and political representation. But unfortunately, the classification that exists in our secondary data does not reflect this broad scope, and it keeps a more traditional interpretation of the artistic cultural activity. And for instance, crafts and popular indigenous Afro-Brazilian culture and also gastronomy are not included in the main data sources. So there is a significant data limitation. There is a struggle regarding the political scene. And of course, Brazil is itself huge and with a big cultural diversity. So measure its creative economy is a challenge, but we try. And our aim was to analyze the structure and evolution of the creative economy in Brazil in the periods of 2012 to 2021. In national terms, large regions and sectors based on occupation, employment, and income. For this, we use the National Continuous Household Sample Survey, the annual social information report from the Ministry of Economy, and data on international trade also from the Ministry of Economy. So in general terms, in 2005, there were around 46,000 establishments is understood as creative. And the audiovisual segment was the most representative with 18%. And the smallest sectors were heritage, fashion, and music. For 2010, we see a 20% growth with emphasis on architecture and design with almost 50% of expansion. And when we go to 2019, we actually see a drop from the previous year, and with exception of the visual arts and advertisement. And it's noteworthy as well that editing and printing present a biggest drop of around 27%. So give Brazilian territorial extension, of course, we expected some socioeconomic inequalities regarding the distribution of the creative activity across the country. And as we can see in this map, we have the Southeast region as the greatest concentration. And of course, it is also the most populous region in the country with great economic power, and it's where São Paulo is located, and the state of São Paulo remains as the main locus of the creative activity through the whole analyzed period. There was a relatively increase in the southern states from 2010, and also from Northeast and Midwest in 2015 and 2019. The North region was the smallest in terms of creative companies, and although this concentration is quite obvious, we have to be careful because there is, again, a cultural diversity with a major calendar of events that does not comes in our data set. So for example, we have a lot of festivities that are specific from certain periods of the year, as our well-known carnival, that are actually not part of the data set because anyways, it comes a lot of different actors and some immaterial value that, well, the system doesn't account for. But yes, in terms of exportation, there was an expansion in the period analyzed from around 130 million US dollars in 2005 to 174 in 2015. And from 2016 on, this number grows significantly, reaching over 450 million in 2019. And the initial year, the figures with high value was related to jewelry sector with more than 50% of the total. And well, given both the data about the creative establishments and also this international transaction, we can say that there is a continued positive trend in Brazilian cultural economy with a strong expansion in the last years. And activities as architecture and design and advertisement and visual arts are large in terms of establishments, and arts and entertainment, they come as the sector raising the most among the exports agenda. And well, going for talking about jobs, both formal and informal, we observe a drop of almost 50% in total of works in the creative economy between 2019 and 2021, which, well, is impossible not to think of the COVID-19 outbreak. And the degree of informality in the creative activities is higher than the whole economy. So we have for the creative industry 50% of informality and the whole economy 40%. The participation of the creative economy sector in the whole Brazilian economy is around 1%, which is kind of the same for all the regions. And when observing the income and informality, there are some difference in the big regions of Brazil, and the inequality of values, especially in regarding the low average of North and Northeast, are evidence of that. And in terms of, sorry, I didn't pass. And in terms of the composition, we see that design and architecture come as the sector that absorbed the most of workers, both formal and informal. And we see an increase from 2012 to 2019 of the share in advertisement at the expense of the reduction in editing and printing, audiovisual, music, and performance and visual arts. So even though we see that like advertisement is growing and in number of companies and also occupation, and again with architecture and design observing lots of work, there is a decrease in employment in other sectors. And this may be a global movement, and due to the era of digitalization and cultural streaming service and so on and so forth. But we cannot deny that there is a historical context in which the peripheral countries have been on the sidelines of the global economy. So when we talk about Latin America coming to this era of the creative economy, maybe we can see through our finding, as we have still uneven conditions, and especially in terms of enterprises and degree of informality, that when understanding what is the cultural policies that we are talking about, we can perhaps challenge these functionalist and dominant discourses, trying to approach the creative economy to this local and traditional culture and artistic practice that point some opportunities for assessing a perhaps more inclusive future, especially for these social groups that has been historically marginalized. So yeah, I hope this pandemic can bring some transformation, and well, there is hope, at least I have to believe so. Thank you very much for hearing to our presentation, and I'll pass the word on.
Many thanks, Alice. So now, please, Laura.
Thank you. I trust you can see my screen now. Okay, thank you so much. Well, good afternoon for everyone. Good morning here from Colombia. My name is Laura Morgan. I'm delighted to be here in this panel, leading by my colleagues. I want to thank them before I start for their insightful considerations and contributions. I am fully aware the time is upon us, but I will try to squeeze everything as much as I can so you can have a general understanding of what is happening in Colombia. So this will be my outline today. As you can notice, my goal is to illustrate the general framework of the orange economy as move into the application and enforcement in the territories. For this, I choose the case of Barrio Bajo in Barranquilla, one of the first orange districts in the Caribbean region and a leading example of my hometown. Last but not least, I will share some reflections and challenges that the orange economy is facing in this post-COVID era. So I want to start by answering the big question, what is the orange economy? First, I believe that this is the most important thing. The term was actually coined by Felipe Buitrago and the current president of Colombia, Iván Duque, in the book, The Orange Economy and Infinite Opportunity, published by the IDB back in 2013. For both authors, the orange economy encompasses everything from books, movies, software, advertising, cultural manifestations, everything. So the orange economy is linked to all the creative supporting activities that transform ideas into cultural goods and services. On that note, the orange economy pick up the traditional artistic activities related to the preservation and transmission of cultural heritage from the cultural economy, combined with the activities linked to the creative industry. At the end, what we have is that the orange economy represents a whole in which every activity is linked with a cultural or creative manifestation, and all of these have a room in the nation's development. So back in 2013, both authors saw the orange economy as a huge potential for the region in terms of its contribution to the national and regional GDP, but also in terms of contribution to labor force. As you can notice from the graphs and from both of my slides, both the authors identified that the orange economy represented a 3.3% of Colombia's national GDP and a contribution of 5.8% on its labor force. As numbers that surprisingly has been maintained, even though despite the crisis and the fluctuations of the economy in the present years. Now, coming back to the orange economy implementation in the Colombian national and political landscape, undoubtedly, by being one of the architects of this norm, the orange economy has been a key proposal of President Iván Duque's platform to strengthen and boost the national economy. His goal is to make the creative economy 6% of the country's GDP by 2022. To reach that goal, the government has the Orange Law, or the Law 1834 of 2017. The Orange Law established general guidelines and creates a public policy for the creative economy. It also made it easier for creative businesses to access credit, pave the way for a digital and cultural infrastructure, help them to access to capital, and ultimately, it will increase the number of cultural platforms in Colombia. This first policy has been the stepping stone towards acknowledging the necessary connection between the culture and development. Along with the Orange Law, two bigger political moves were made. The first was the finance bill, which exempt business from paying the 33% of income tax. And the second one was the creation of the National Council of Orange Economy. It's an institutional body conformed by the President, the Ministries of Culture, Finance, Commerce, ICT, as well as the National Department of Statistics and other governmental bodies. The National Council of Orange Economy is responsible to formulate the general guidelines and coordinate the different actions that will ultimately promote the development of the orange economy. Now, taking into consideration this institutional framework, I want to show you the different sectors and activities that are included in the orange policy. This is just for you to have a sense of the different sectors that compose the orange economy, the same ones that actually were highlighted by both Buitrago and Duque back in 2013. According to the National Department of Statistics, DANI, the orange economy represents more than 3.4% of Colombia's GDP. Its average annual growth has been between the 3.2% and the 3%, with the greatest weight on the audiovisual sector. Unfortunately, I do not have the latest data. This is the one that has been the latest published. But what I wanted to show you is the ambitious project that Colombia has is actually increase the participation of the orange economy from 3.4% to a 6.8% of the national GDP by 2022, something that is actually quite ambitious, taking into consideration the current situation that we're facing thanks to COVID. The following snapshots are just for you to see the contribution of the orange economy to jobs and the gross added value in 2019, which is the case of this slide, and between 2014 and 2019. What I wanted to show you is that even though the percentage that the orange economy has for the countries is still significant in comparison with other sectors such as oil, such as mining, it is still way behind. So how we make this from the national perspective to how we make this to go lower to the territory. For this, the government created the Orange Development Area. The reason why we did the government did this was mainly to picking up on Colombia's already rich and vast cultural diversity. The government set a range of Orange Development Areas alongside the nation. These areas actually aim to work as a legal frame for state intervention, where artists, creators, entrepreneurs, along with both the local and the national government, can consolidate different processes of creation, production, and distribution of cultural and creative goods and services. These nodes represent network relations, capital, as well as social, artistic, cultural, and heritage processes. Currently, we have 47 Orange Development Areas in 23 territories. The pink circle is actually Bogotá. And I wanted to show you this comparison because although the Orange laws have helped larger cities to grow Orange economies extensively, the inclusion of less densely populated areas has proven sluggish. As a matter of fact, in 2019, 92% of the country's creative services was concentrated in three main capitals, Bogotá, Medellín, and Cali. Hence, a great deal of work remains to ensure that the Orange economy grows throughout the country and not only in the capital. This is the main reason why I choose Barrio Abajo as an example of the Orange economy in a medium-large city. Okay, so what is Barrio Abajo? Barrio Abajo is an Orange district located in Barranquilla, Colombia, which is in the north, in the Caribbean side of the country. Barrio Abajo stands as a converging point where architecture, history, folklore, gastronomy, and other elements of Barranquilla's popular culture converge. Besides being the birthplace of Barranquilla's carnival, the second largest after Rio, Barrio Abajo captures the essence of the magical realism and the quintessence of being from the Colombian Caribbean coast. Well, as I said, it's located in Barranquilla, Colombia, but you might be wondering why does it matter? For the last decade, Barranquilla has been a model for public and private partnerships. It is no surprise that now a project like this will aim to relaunch the city as a cultural hub. As a matter of fact, there has been a lot of initiatives from the city in order to position itself as a capital of culture in Colombia and also in Latin America. The cultural development might work as a perfect platform to allocate both public and private investment on behalf of cultural goods, something odd in a country where culture was not a sign of investment. Additionally, through the support to local businesses and the promotion of public investment and policies for employment, Barrio Abajo, along with the city's major office, looks to channel the Orange economy policies to bridge the gap between the inhabitants of Barrio Abajo, most of them living in vulnerable communities, and most of them members and descendants of the Afro-Colombian community. In sum, what we are witnessing in Barrio Abajo is an environment that ensures the protection of local cultural identity and attracts large companies so they can invest and develop in the future. Okay, but you might be wondering, what are the challenges of all these orange policies? Well, first of all, in summary, there is a lot of things happening isolated in the orange economy in Colombia. Although indeed, this is a great opportunity to mind the gap between the public and the private sector and put this investment into the cultural goods, the reality is that historically, this has been a forgotten sector from both sectors. This has been a forgotten sectors from both sides. Historically, neither the government, neither the private sector has invested in culture, even though this is a country that has a rich and fruitful cultural and creative manifestations in all its territories. While many believe the Orange Law is a step in the right direction, there are many critics who wonder if it will truly benefit creative and artists. As a matter of fact, some worry that the National Orange Economic Council does not include the people that actually will be benefited. In their seats, there is not even a participation of artists, creators, or any union related to the cultural industry. Others worry that financing creative industry by extending lines of credit will create a cycle of debt. However, beyond any criticism, the government needs to strengthen existing favorable conditions for potential creators, investors, both in large and small communities. What means that the effort should not be only made to the large capital, but should be going to the small territories, especially the ones disseminated in the territories that were affected by the Colombian conflict. And of course, I cannot talk about the challenges without mentioning COVID. COVID has shown us the importance of culture, the importance of the value for culture. That is undoubtedly. But even though there is a commitment from the national government, it is necessary to restrain and to get to strengthen this cultural manifestation and just be a way of the catchy phrases. With this, what I meant is that it's important to have a support in order to make this small and especially local manifestation of culture to have the room to be potentially developed in the post-COVID era. Now, in general challenge of the orange economy in a post-COVID context, and one last tip regarding Barrio Bajo. Although this is a step in the right direction without accurate data, it is difficult to measure the efficiency of the Orange Law and the efforts made by the government in order to protect and develop in creative industry. This is why there's a lot of skepticism in terms if the government would be able to reach the 6% by 2022. Only time will tell if these laws are enough to push the orange economy forward. At the end, as mentioned earlier, in a country where diversity and culture are part of their DNA, culture should be an economic option for its inhabitants. And of course, in the case of Barrio Bajo, it is necessary that the local government comes with the support of the national government and the private sector in order to support the development of these areas. It cannot be just in catching prices, and it cannot be just in promotion activities. It should be a consistent support in order to make this territory not only a cultural hub, but also a place where opportunities can happen to people in different social conditions. Well, that was my sip for today. I hope you enjoyed. I will be attentive to any of your questions, and thank you so much.
Great, Laura. Thank everybody for the outstanding presentations. The main conclusions of the creative economy in South America are: we have variations in concepts. In Colombia, they say orange economy. In Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, creative economy in the most common term. For the four countries, the creative economy contributes around 3% to the GDP. Policies for cultural and creative economies have shifted from national reinforcement in Argentina, for example, to a more local approach in the cases of Brazil and Colombia, where every state or city has a different way to think of the cultural and creative development. Argentina is the only country that has a satellite account, and except for Brazil, all the others have cultural policies driven to economics. In terms of sectors, the most important is the audiovisual, Colombia, design and architecture. That in Brazil, design includes handcraft, like many once again, I would like to economy in Latin is an excellent reference. Well, moving on, let's now read some of the questions from the chat. Oh, we don't have questions. Thank you, everybody, to be here, to attending and learning about economic, creative economies in South America. I would like to thank you, ASEI, especially the organizer, because I think it's the first time that we have a panel treat this subject. Thank you. Have a good day, a good evening.